Hi. Welcome to Monkey Times Movie Reviews, courtesy of North American Video. Thanks to them. We thank them. This is a good one. It's an anthology, 3 short movies from South Korea. Sci-fi. See the robot? It thinks it's Buddha, kind of. Or other people think it's Buddha. Oh, it's good. That's the middle short. They're all about a half hour long, which is good. Good. I like half-hour-long movies, and wish more movies were half-hour long. The first movie's a little zombie story, South Korean zombie story, spread through a fast food restaurant, and the last one's about the end of the world. So there you go. Really good. If you like sci-fi, you're gonna like one of these 3 for sure. Oh man, is this a good movie? The Sessions. It's about a guy in an iron lung who wants to have sex for the first time. Yep. And that's a sex therapist. Yep. I know it sounds like a real downer, but it's a hoot. William Macy's the priest who has to decide whether he gives his okay to this kind of non-married sex. The sex therapist says you only get 6 sessions, and then we got to stop. And it's just a really, the acting's incredible. And it's just a really fun, interesting, very sexy, honest movie. Honest sex in a movie, in an iron lung. Oh, speaking of honest sex, this one's good too. This is, the critics are split on this one. If you go to Rotten Tomatoes, the reviews are like, well, the relationship doesn't really go anywhere, and blah, blah, blah. I liked it a lot. It's basically the story of 2 married people who meet and have an affair over the course of years in 28 different hotel rooms. And each section is like room 707, room 1213. It's just rooms, you know? And so the story's told through these individual hotel rooms. And some of them are really short. One of them is just one of the people sitting on a bed, realizing that the other one's not going to show up that year. It's not even that year, it's multiple times a year. Anyway, and others are really long. And the sex is really honest. Honest, hot, relationship sex. I thought it was great. The critics are split. I think that's a good sign. I've mentioned this one before. It's really, there's one of the Muppets, not the Muppets, what do they call them things? Hobbits. One of the Hobbits is in here. He's one of the Hobbits. Yeah, it's a post-apocalypse story, so all you kids out there that like a good Death of Civilization story, yep, all you kids out there who like that, this is a good one. It's like a zombie movie with a little bit of a twist. I won't ruin it, but it's like a zombie movie with a little bit of a twist, and it's brutal, so watch out, kids. There's a couple brutal scenes, but it's not like that total torture porn. It kind of hints at that once or twice, but mostly it's just horrible decline of humanity. And who doesn't like that? Oh, I think I've mentioned this one too. It's a wordless visual poem. Look at that. Just imagine an hour and a half of beautiful stuff like that. Oh, it's not as good as the director's previous film, Baraka, which if you haven't seen, B-A-R-A-K-A, you should watch. But this, oh, just put it on. Entertain the cats. They're going to love it. It's got great music and great scenery from around the world, and oh, it's just this gorgeous visual poem. Perfect for folding laundry. And you know I'm going to have a gay movie in there. This is like, it's like Perks of Being a Wallflower. Of course you all have seen that because Emma Watson's in it, and that's a good movie with a gay character too. Not a main character, but you know, there's some good gay stuff in Perks of Being a Wallflower. But this is like Perks of Being a Wallflower, but smaller and I think a little smarter. It's about kids who, let's see, the bottom one is a PK, preacher's kid, who's losing her faith. The middle one's a kid who still has his faith, but starts to realize he's gay. And the top one still has her faith and really doesn't know how she's going to deal with her friends after they lose their faith or turn gay, or you know, admit they're gay. So it's really good. I highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. And it's set in Charleston, South Carolina. And it's well acted. kids usually give me hives, but this is well acted. Highly recommended. You don't have to be gay to like it. It's a really good story of coming of age and coming into and out of faith, and really, really well done. Very cute movie about a guy with a increasingly troublesome sleep disorder and his relationships. It's got the girl who played Claire from 6 Feet Under. She's great in it, and really neat. If you heard the NPR story this was based on, you know the story, but it's really great. Fun little, 80-minute comedy. Finally, 3 quick documentaries. The Imposter. Great little story about a kid who goes missing, and the imposter who shows up with a completely foreign accent, different color eyes and everything, gets the family to believe it's him. Yes, it's true. That's what happened. Anyway, it's twisty, turny, and kind of unfolds in really interesting ways, and yeah, good one. This one won the Academy Award for Best Documentary this year. I don't think it's that good, but it's really good, especially if you know nothing about him. He's a guy put out a couple of great records in the early 70s, disappeared off the map, completely unaware that he became hugely popular and famous in South Africa, right? Now, watch the movie and then go to the Wikipedia page, and you'll see a couple things they left out to make the movie sexier. And kids, you'll learn something about how documentaries are made and how sometimes documentary filmmakers twist things just a touch to make the movie a little bit, more exciting. It's kind of too bad because it would have been just as exciting without it. But, here we go. Great little movie about a musician. Oh, and he's such a nice guy. Oh. And finally, everyone's favorite, the AIDS documentary, also nominated for an Academy Award. I know, you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to rush and carve out some time in my busy schedule to watch the AIDS documentary, but it's not just a documentary about AIDS. It's about ACT UP and the people who were fighting to get better trials, faster drug trials, and all kinds of other stuff done to get the government to pay attention in the late 80s, mid to late 80s. It doesn't start at the beginning of the plague. It starts in 1987 with ACT UP really getting its act together. Oh, it's so inspirational. Watch at least the first the first hour. Watch at least the first hour to see how they changed the way the FDA regulated this stuff. It's really good. Okay, thanks to North American Video, and yeah, we'll see you next time.
Exactly the same time. Here we go. The parade. Across the line. Whoa. Yeah, I like it. What is this? Go on this! Woo! They're behind this guy. There they go.
Oh, you didn't tell me you and Jen also wore kilts.
Yeah, we're killed though.
Jen raced in a kilt?
Yeah, she did.
Wow, how'd she do?
Respectable.
Respectable? I'll bet she, yeah. Carol's girlfriend's a runner, right? And so once, where did I see her? I saw her downtown. I saw once running with a couple of her friends. And then I hopped in my car and drove up to Cup of Joe on Hillsborough Street. And I swear to God, 3 minutes later, Jen and her friends come running by. I was like, that was like 3 miles, 3.5 miles. And they just did it like that, just breezing right through. Yeah, your girlfriend's a runner, Carol. Only what? Only, oh, Carol's only a runner, only if chased. So welcome to Monkey Time. I hope you like the movie reviews. There's some great movies out there, and I'm going to keep on watching them, thanks to North American Video. We have to talk about, oh yeah, I linked a couple of neat things on the Twitter page. There's so much outrage in my Twitter feed right now, Carol, and I'm sure on Facebook of the stuff, the bills that have been introduced in the North Carolina legislature this week. Monkeys, there's just, you have to focus your outrage. There's just a couple of them. It's just too much. You can't focus on all of them. There's one thing that there are two things we're going to talk about today that the Republicans are doing. The first one is the way they're dramatically trying to stop people from voting in the next election. This is Art Pope's dream. He knows that his ideology cannot win at the ballot box. So what the Republicans are doing, they're doing this staunchly ideologically driven legislative push, knowing this may be their last chance. And what they're trying to do is screw with the ballot box, keep people away from the ballot box as much as possible in the elections for years to come so that they can consolidate their power. Because they know that once people see what they've done to North Carolina, they will be out on their ears. That's just a fact, as I see it. So why else? Why else are they doing this? They're running scared. They're scared. So we're going to talk about that. And then the other thing is they're pushing to repeal this very modest subsidy for renewable energy like solar power and wind, requiring Duke/Progress, whatever it's called this week, which is now one company, to have, I think it's like somewhere between 10 and 12.5% of its energy, of its retail energy sales from renewable sources by 2021, Carol. 10 to 12.5%. This is the future, monkeys. You know, China is investing heavily in this kind of stuff. China is investing, India's investing, Brazil's investing, all these countries that are sort of the next tier countries in the 21st century. Right, Carol? There's Brazil, China, India. What's the other one? Some people say Russia, but they're not doing much investing in renewables, I don't think. But could be, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, there's a couple of those countries that are sort of the second tier countries, right below the main, you know, big modern industrialized countries. Well, I guess Brazil and India, China count as that now. But they're the ones that are going to be driving the economy in the future, and all of them are heavily investing in renewables. But the Republican administration here, the governor, who's a former Duke guy, and the House and Senate, both controlled by Republicans in North Carolina, are pushing to repeal even that modest thing. And the arguments they're using are ridiculous. But first, let's talk about the voting. And the John Locke Foundation ought to be ashamed of itself on claiming to be doing economic analysis of this, but including none of the externalized costs in any kind of analysis that they do. They really ought to be ashamed of themselves, the John Locke Foundation. Pure ideology, blinkered ideology. Where do you talk about the costs of pollution? Oh, right, we don't talk about those, John Locke Foundation. Yeah, we don't quantify. We don't even bother quantifying those. All right. So the voting thing is really interesting. The latest thing that they're doing, can we go back to number 5, Carol? This is Neil Hunt. He's the Wake County, one of the senators for Wake County, but one of the main drivers behind the push to change the voting districts, the Wake County school board districts, and redistricting there so that the Republicans like Tedesco get a free pass and the Democrats all have to compete against each other, and of course they can't. You can only have one win. So really, Neil Hunt has been a major driver behind a lot of this. What he's doing, he's on board with the bill that if you're a parent and you have a dependent child who's in college, what Bill Cook and Neil Hunt's bill, there's about 5 or 6 other people signed on, but you know, Neil Hunt's the Wake County senator here, the one who's the one who's causing all the trouble, the Republican one. What they're saying is if you're a parent who has a dependent child who's in college, you can still get, if you claim that child as a dependent, the $2,500 tax deduction for a dependent child. This new bill that Neil Hunt is pushing in the North Carolina legislature, Senator Neil Hunt, would remove that if your child, you can still be providing financial support to your child. You can still be giving your child all of the child's money, all of your child's food, all of your child's school books, all of your child's school money. You could be the person your child depends on to make sure they get through college. financially. But if your child registers to vote where your child goes to school, Neil Hunt and Bill Cook, in their infinite wisdom, have now decided you shouldn't get the $2,500 tax deduction for a dependent child anymore because your child is daring to vote in a district where the child mostly lives. Now, we've had court case after court case after court case, which has determined that kids have the right, college kids have the right to vote and register to vote where they are going to school. And if their parents are still, paying for them, they can still be dependents. But what Neil Hunt is pushing is they're dangling $2,500 worth of tax deduction per child in front of North Carolina parents and saying, if you want this, your child has to register to vote in the hometown where you live.
And then travel back.
And then, as Carol's pointing out, travel back during a primary in May. When is that, finals week? I'll bet you it's finals week. I'll bet you they're that smart about this. During a primary in May or during the first week in November. In the middle of the semester, wherever you are, in North Carolina, you would have to, as a student, you would have to travel back in order for your parents to get the tax deduction that they've been automatically getting. They're punishing students for wanting to vote where they go to school for convenience, right? They're forcing the parents to say, if you want that tax deduction, your child can only be registered to vote where you are. Now, there are probably ways to get around this. Absentee ballots, Carol. There are definitely ins and outs, but why do it? Because they know that not everyone's going to do the absentee ballot. They're putting up roadblock after, and you can call the phone, it's live right now if you're watching me on Wednesday at 8 o'clock. They're putting up roadblock after roadblock. They're chipping away bit by bit, hoping they know that even if, you can just get around with absentee ballots if that's possible. Lord knows if they're even going to allow that. They know that some people aren't going to do that, so they'll lose some people there, right? They know that some kids aren't going to travel back home. They'll lose some people there. They know some parents are going to force their kids to register where they are and say you'll do the absentee. They'll just lose people bit by bit. They're chipping away at felons. You have the right to vote after you've served your time, even in North Carolina if you're a convicted felon. Well, that's not good enough for Art Pope and Neil Hunt and Bill Cook and all the guys in the men and women of the Republican Party in North Carolina. No, they are talking about adding a 5-year waiting period before you can vote again. Other states are moving in the opposite direction of letting felons vote. In more and more states, Virginia's been fighting it for a long time, but it looks like it may happen. Maybe not. They know that most felons, or not most, but a significant chunk of felons, I have no idea whether it's most, more, whatever, a significant chunk are lower income folks and black folks who tend to vote Democratic. So by attacking felons' rights, former felons who've done their time. What was the problem with felons voting after they've done their time in North Carolina, Carol? There was none. But they're now talking about adding a 5-year waiting period. Why? Because that's another little chip at Democratic voters. There's nothing they're doing here that makes any kind of sense at all. What's the point to not having parents, to not allowing college kids to be claimed as dependents and register to vote? Well, they know college kids disproportionately vote for the other guys. So now that they're in control, they're going to just cut them out of the equation. There's no rationale for this. There's no politics here. There's no libertarian argument the John Locke Foundation can wave around with a position paper that conveniently ignores strong evidence. They don't have a rationale except we need to stop people who vote Democratic from voting. How can we do this? While you and I are playing around on the internet, they are brainstorming new ways to do this. Oh, well, let's let felons vote, but let's make them wait 5 years after they get out of jail. What problem does that solve? It's despicable. I'll let you decide what it is. But it's clear what they're doing. No same-day registration anymore. You can't show up and say, I want to register. Other states have done it. It's not a problem. It doesn't lead to more fraud. There's no evidence of it. We know this, right? That's going to be gone. No early voting, or they're limiting early voting, right? They're cutting it back by a week. Why? Because early voting is convenient and more people vote. More people vote, you make it easier for people to vote, that means poor people can vote. Poor people tend to vote Democratic. All this is an attack on poor people's right to vote. That's it. You know, I'm not even touching the voter ID thing, because other countries like Ireland and other places have voter ID laws, and you know, we'll deal with that. There is at least a case to be made philosophically that voter ID laws are something at least valid to debate. I think it's wrong. I think it's a terrible argument, but there's at least an argument. There's no argument, no philosophical or moral argument for making felons wait 5 years. We haven't had a problem. There's no moral argument for threatening parents with the loss of the $2,500 tax deduction per child, per dependent child. If the child just votes where they go to school, that doesn't mean you're not dependent. Dependent is economics, right? For the purposes of the tax code. Anyway, there's no rationale for this stuff except we want to stop people from voting. Carol, we're going to keep saying it again. At some point, you got to ask yourself, what would get me out protesting in front of Neil Hunt's house? Right? What would get me protesting in front of Bill Cook's house? What would get me protesting in front of Art Pope's house? These are serious political questions in North Carolina right now, because these guys do this stuff. They see a little bit of outrage on Twitter and over their phones for a couple of days, and then it dies down, and they move on to the next thing. It's a serious political question. What would get you protesting in front of Senator Neil Hunt's house right now? What that he is proposing would do that? Those are serious questions. You know, legal protest on public right-of-way, on the public right-of-way, of course. That's, you know, that goes without saying. I don't even want to hear anybody. And if you're ever in a group where somebody's suggesting an illegal protest or something like that, I'm serious. 9 times out of 10, it's a plant from the cops. And just shove them aside and go about with your peaceful legal protest as best you can. Because you know those people are there, right? I know, I'm not trying to sow mistrust or anything, but we've seen it. We've seen the provocateurs, you know? I mean, they do that. That's what they do. They get people on drug charges or something and get them to infiltrate, and then they're the ones suggesting that we throw rocks through people's windows and stuff. It's like anytime somebody suggests that kind of thing, 99% chance they're planted there by your political opponents. I'm sorry, that's just, we've seen it. Don't argue with me, you know it's true. Okay, can we move on to the renewable energy law? All right, 4.5 minutes, wow. So what they're doing is the Republicans are repealing this law that passed in 2007. The John Locke Foundation is waving around all these costs and benefits and jobs, and maybe some of the jobs claims are inflated on the solar and wind side, but there is no doubt, maybe. And the John Locke Foundation, then they come up with their own figures about the costs of all this. Right, the costs of this renewable energy law that requires a company, a big centralized company, to start looking at some sources that don't get so heavily subsidized. Because here's what the John Locke Foundation doesn't talk about. What they call externalized costs. These are costs that don't show up in the market price of things like nuclear power, coal, and gas, natural gas. Right? They don't show up. Things like the cap on insurance liability. Oh, the nuclear people hate when you talk about this, but it's a fact. The nuclear industry gets its insurance costs subsidized by you and me, and has since the very beginning. Don't talk to me. And you know, we have these idiots in the Republican Party in North Carolina. Why should we be subsidizing this? Let it compete in the free marketplace, solar and wind. And it can't. Ha ha, the end. Meanwhile, every other country in the world is like heavily investing in this stuff because they see it's efficient and useful. Right? We're going to be way behind because of these idiots. But the fact is, their argument on its face is absurd. On its face, because we are already subsidizing massively coal, nuclear, and gas. It's just a fact. Nuclear power plants, the cost, the construction costs, subsidized by you. The insurance when things goes wrong, their liability is capped. That's not the free market, Republicans. You know it, you just don't talk about it. Nuclear power could not compete in the free market. It does not compete in the free market. It is heavily subsidized, has been for decades since its inception, heavily subsidized by federal and state governments. That's just a fact. So here comes solar and wind trying to get a little bit of a subsidy going, and all of a sudden you get this ideologically pure argument from folks like the John Locke Foundation and their sort of low-level knockoffs in the state legislature. Right? So don't even talk to me about how dare we subsidize this. It's basically, this is the argument. You've got two people that you want to run a race: solar, renewables, wind, and then coal and nukes and all them. You keep solar, wind, and hydrothermal, all the renewable energy, including efficiency. You keep that in a box chained up for 6 weeks. And you feed nuclear and coal really well and keep them exercised. Then you let the solar out of the box, give it, a little carb bar, chocolate carb bar, and say, okay, run. It still feels the chains. It just got out of a box. It's not a fair race. And meanwhile, you're still pouring subsidies, and you're still subsidizing the invisible costs of coal ash spills, all this stuff. The John Locke Foundation doesn't talk one iota about the pollution costs. Why? Because we don't see them. They're someone else's problem, or they're low level. You try to add those in, and suddenly solar and wind start looking a lot more competitive. But we can't have that. So repealing this renewable energy requirement, it's modest. It's very modest. It's ridiculous. We should be investing in the future of renewable energy. Anything decentralized, where a central company like Duke and Progress, or whatever they're called, can't control it. Decentralized energy they see as bad. Libertarians, John Locke Foundation, are supposed to like decentralization. Instead, what we're getting is a push to keep more centralization, more controlled power, centralized power. When are you going to get out in the streets, monkeys? Take care of each other. We'll see you next week.